Eleanor Bright noticed the HOA letter before her coffee had finished brewing. Violation: exterior paint not in compliance with HOA color code. Repaint within 14 days. She held the paper in both hands, tilting it slightly to catch the morning sun slanting across the tile floor. The header was embossed in dull gray, official enough to look legal, but somehow smug. Her coffee maker sputtered behind her, releasing the familiar scent of decaf and slow mornings. She didn't pour it yet. She just stood there, bare feet on the cool kitchen tile, wondering when neighbors had stopped knocking and started sending warnings in 12-point bold. She set the letter beside the crossword puzzle she'd abandoned from yesterday, right between 8 across, insincere praise, and a half-eaten piece of dry toast. Through the window above the sink, the desert light spilled onto the porch's pale green trim, the one she'd painted herself last fall using leftover samples from when Sophie moved in. The same soft sage that her late husband once said reminded him of summer uniforms in the Navy. A light tap on the screen door startled her. She turned and there stood Cheryl Whitmore, in heels too high for gravel and a smile stretched just tight enough to split. "Good morning, Eleanor," Cheryl called, not bothering to wait before stepping halfway inside. "Saw the notice came through. Just a formality, of course. But we do ask for full compliance within the timeframe." Eleanor motioned her toward the kitchen table. Cheryl didn't sit, just hovered beside the chair like a retail mannequin on break. "I thought the house was within code," Eleanor said evenly. "Well, the approved shades were updated last quarter. Didn't you receive the new palette flyer?" She pulled out a folded brochure from her tote, lined with chips of beige, sandstone, and something called Twilight Taupe. Eleanor didn't take it. "I suppose I missed that." Cheryl clicked her tongue. "Easy to do. We're trying to modernize a bit, you know. Raise property values. Consistency helps." There was nothing inconsistent about her trim, Eleanor thought. It wasn't fluorescent, it wasn't flaking. But she said nothing. Instead, she gestured toward the stove. "Coffee?" "Oh, no. I'm already jittery," Cheryl said with a polite shudder. "I've got 3 more rounds to make this morning." Eleanor watched her go, heels clacking down the concrete steps like punctuation marks. Only after the door clicked shut did she finally pour the coffee, black and steady, into her favorite ceramic mug, the one with a chip on the rim that somehow made it feel more permanent. Sophie came into the kitchen barefoot, her hair still half-braided from the night before. "Was that the HOA woman?" she asked, yawning. "Yes." "Did she bring muffins?" "No." Sophie raised an eyebrow, then grabbed a banana from the bowl. "So what's the fine if we don't paint?" Eleanor sipped. "It didn't say." "Well, maybe it's time you wrote them one of those bold font letters right back." Sophie peeled her banana with theatrical flair. "Or maybe we should call Aunt Martha." Eleanor gave her a look that was half amusement, half fatigue. "We're not calling Martha. She took down a pharmacy chain once," Sophie said. "Remember that thing with the insurance billing codes? She doesn't need to deal with this." Sophie shrugged. "Still. I wouldn't repaint. Not just yet." The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community room behind the leasing office, where folding chairs groaned under the weight of residents and expectations. A plate of lemon cookies rested untouched near the coffee urn, a polite offering no one trusted anymore. Eleanor sat near the back, her trim blazer still faintly scented with cedar drawer liner. Cheryl stood at the front beside the agenda board, reading off motions and updates with her practiced crispness. She paused at item 5. "We've had several minor compliance issues crop up this month, most notably house colors that fall outside the approved spectrum," she said, not naming names but turning her gaze toward Eleanor. "We want to remind everyone that non-compliance can result in fines, and additional action if needed." A few heads turned. Eleanor felt the heat creep into her collar, but she didn't look away. Sophie, seated beside her, leaned in and whispered, "She's picking you on purpose." "I know," Eleanor whispered back. Her hands were still. Her back straight. But something in her chest had started to settle, like dust deciding where to land. As the meeting adjourned and people filtered out into the twilight, Sophie held the door for her aunt and said softly, "Want me to text Aunt Martha?" Cheryl Whitmore, Martha said on speaker, has no idea who she just ticked off. The voice crackled through Eleanor's rotary phone, the old beige plastic humming gently beside a stack of papers. Sophie leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. "She sounds the same," Sophie said, nudging her aunt's elbow. "You remember that call she made to that clinic in Flagstaff?" The billing department apologized before she even finished her sentence. Eleanor handed her niece a sheet of HOA guidelines, freshly retrieved from the filing drawer that's still stuck on the left side. "Let's hope she still has the same fire." The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and warm peach. The cobbler was cooling near the window, steam rising through the lattice top. Outside, the Arizona sun settled low, filtering through lace curtains and brushing the worn tile floor in gold. It was the kind of afternoon that used to be quiet. "I need you to do a few things for me," Martha continued. "Send me pictures. Trim, driveway, mail slot. The full list of violations. Anything you have from them since Cheryl took over." Eleanor flipped through a pile beside the phone. "There's the notice. And a newsletter from April. Some bylaws printout. I think they slipped something in about color updates. Good. I want to see the fine print. They usually hide the teeth in the footnotes." Sophie walked over to the counter and picked up her phone, thumbing through the camera roll. "I'll get better shots in the morning," she said. "This lighting's too dramatic." She tapped her screen a few times, then paused. "Do you want me to start keeping copies of their handouts? I can scan them. Just in case." Eleanor looked at her with surprise. "You think this will go that far?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "I think they're hoping it won't. Which is why we probably should." Martha gave a short, satisfied sound on the line. "Smart girl. Quiet paper trails are louder than you think." Eleanor let the words settle as she glanced back toward the porch. The soft sage trim looked calm against the amber sky, but something under her ribs felt like it had started to stretch. Not anger, something steadier. "I'm not trying to stir trouble," she said, more to herself than the line. "No one said anything about stirring," Martha replied. "We're just going to shine a little light on what's already crawling around." By evening, the kitchen table had become a modest war room. Bylaws, printed emails, newsletters with clip art logos of house icons and trees. Sophie had arranged everything into neat piles. She'd even labeled one folder in Sharpie, petty but possibly legal. She opened her phone's voice memo app and recorded herself reading aloud the exact wording of Cheryl's visit. "Neighborhood standards," she said, mimicking the HOA president's precise cadence. "We do ask for full compliance." "You're not posting that anywhere, are you?" Eleanor asked, slicing into the cobbler with practiced hands. "No," Sophie said. "Not yet. I'm just archiving." Eleanor handed her a plate, the edges warm, the peaches soft. "I remember when neighbors used to borrow sugar, not police your paintbrush." Sophie took the plate but didn't eat right away. She opened her notes app and typed the words Episode 1, Quiet Power at the top of a new entry. Martha called again just after 8. Her voice was lower now, the evening pulling her into focus. "I looked through their liability clause," she said. "There's some language in there that doesn't match state compliance. Specifically, their coverage carrier. The document says they're under Sandview Mutual." "That's what's on the newsletter," Eleanor replied. "Right. But Sandview pulled out of Arizona in February. I know that because I helped audit one of their exit reports. So unless Cheryl's got a new carrier and forgot to mention it, this HOA is technically operating without a legal risk shield." Eleanor sat very still. "What does that mean?" "It means they're bluffing. And bluffing with no backup." Outside, the dusk deepened into full desert night. A coyote howled somewhere distant. Sophie closed the curtain halfway. "Don't repaint a single thing until I've seen it," Martha said firmly. I'll book a flight first thing tomorrow. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked around her kitchen, the rotary phone, the second-hand toaster, the pewter mug tree that had lost one of its branches. Things she hadn't chosen for show, only for keeping. Her hand rested on the worn countertop, palm flat. "All right," she said softly. Sophie set her phone down. "I think we're going to need more folders." At the block's community cleanup, Cheryl handed out lemonade and compliance citations in the same breath. The morning was warm enough to bake bread on the sidewalk. Pop-up tents lined the main cul-de-sac in Sunridge Hollow, their corners flapping gently in the dry breeze. Folding tables offered paper cups of lemonade sweating under the sun, bowls of discount-brand pretzels, and little flyers about community pride. Cheryl Whitmore stood at the center of it all like a cruise director. Her HOA polo shirt was starched, her visor a spotless white that reflected sunlight like a warning beacon. She smiled constantly, but never with her eyes. "Welcome, neighbors," she called, waving toward an elderly couple lugging a bag of leaves. "Let's make this place sparkle." Eleanor and Martha arrived quietly, Sophie trailing behind with her phone camera turned off but ready. Eleanor wore her gardening hat, the one with the faded ribbon her husband once tucked wildflowers into. Martha had a clipboard, not because she needed it, but because it made people underestimate her. The moment Cheryl saw Eleanor, her smile sharpened. "Oh, Eleanor. I see you're here to help, that's wonderful," she said, striding over. "We noticed a few more things on your property we might need to discuss." Eleanor opened her mouth, but Martha beat her to it. "We're here for the community," Martha said pleasantly. "Always happy to participate. And observe." Cheryl blinked, adjusting her tone. "Of course. The HOA appreciates engaged residents." Nearby, Mr. Jonas leaned against his gatepost, arms crossed, watching. He hadn't brought gloves or bags, just his gaze. As neighbors plucked weeds and scooped gravel into bins, Cheryl floated between groups, passing out paper towels with one hand and notes of observed infractions with the other. Eleanor received one folded neatly with a pink smiley face sticker. Sophie flipped it open and read aloud, "Mailbox faded, may require repainting to align with updated aesthetics. HOA recommends immediate attention." Martha leaned in. "Was that in last month's bulletin?" "No," Sophie whispered. "This is brand new." They wandered toward the refreshment table. Martha picked up a lemonade, swirled the melting ice, then nodded toward Cheryl, who now posed for a photo beside a garbage bag tower. "Tell me," Martha asked as Cheryl approached again, "who's handling your liability coverage these days? Is it still Sandview Mutual?" Cheryl hesitated, just a flicker. Yes, we've been with them for years." "Curious," Martha said lightly, "because I heard they pulled out of this state a while back. I must have misread something." Cheryl's smile froze. "Oh. We renewed early. Locked in our rates. You know how insurance works." "Sure," Martha said, then added with a touch of syrup, "I used to regulate it." There was a brief moment when Cheryl's pupils tightened. "Well," she chirped, "enjoy the lemonade." Martha took a slow sip and said nothing. That evening, Eleanor's kitchen table looked like a minor legal office again. Martha sat with reading glasses perched low, typing quietly on her old laptop. Sophie peered over her shoulder. "What are you sending?" "A formal inquiry," Martha replied. "To Sandview." Posing as a prospective buyer concerned about community coverage. "Nothing aggressive." "And if they respond?" Eleanor asked. "Then we'll know who's bluffing." The reply came the next morning. Martha opened the email and read it silently once, then aloud, "Thank you for contacting Sandview Mutual. We can confirm that no active policy is currently held by any entity named Sunridge Hollow HOA. Our last policy with this organization was terminated February 18, 2023. Eleanor reread the email, heart steady. "Now we start. If there's no valid insurance," Martha said slowly, "you're technically not a legal HOA. The words didn't echo so much as sink into the carpeted floor of the Sunridge Community Clubhouse, landing with the weight of something sharp wrapped in velvet. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering in their usual uneven pattern, and the folding chairs creaked beneath uneasy residents. Cheryl blinked once. Her lips parted slightly, as if to object, but no words came. She was holding the meeting agenda like a shield. Sophie shifted in her seat, sliding her phone to a discreet angle, the voice memo already running. Next to her, Eleanor sat upright, hands folded neatly in her lap, the HOA handbook balanced across her knees. On the far side of the room, Mr. Jonas watched with the same quiet stillness he'd perfected over the years, just 2 fingers drumming occasionally on the handle of his cane. I have here, Martha continued, raising a printed email with both hands, a statement from Sandview Mutual confirming that your group's policy expired in February and was never renewed. That's 5 months of operations without risk coverage. Which, according to the very bylaws this board enforces, renders your actions problematic at best. Unlawful, if we're being exact. A rustle moved through the room like someone had shaken a box of paper leaves. 2 residents in the back whispered to each other. The HOA vice president, a man with an earnest face and a habit of adjusting his glasses whenever nervous, looked toward Cheryl for explanation. It was a clerical delay, Cheryl said quickly, recovering her voice. Our previous treasurer resigned without finalizing the paperwork, and the transition, well, it's been messy. But the board has already voted to rectify the oversight. Martha smiled thinly. That's not reflected in the minutes I reviewed. We haven't had time to formally update everything, Cheryl replied. Her tone carried a hint of strain now, the usual polish warping under pressure. Eleanor unfolded the HOA bylaws and stood. Her voice was quiet but unmistakable. According to Article 4, Section 2, she read, an HOA operating without current liability insurance must halt all enforcement activity until proof of reinstatement is documented and presented to members. Section 3 adds that failure to notify homeowners of policy lapse within 60 days constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. A beat of silence. Then a murmur. The vice president raised his hand slowly. Are you saying, he asked, not looking at anyone in particular, that until now, we've been acting without authority? Eleanor didn't answer. She let the printed page speak for itself. She just folded it once, then again, and sat. Cheryl adjusted her visor. Let's not jump to conclusions. This is a misunderstanding, not misconduct. Martha tilted her head. The law doesn't care about intentions. Only about compliance. One of the board members, a woman in a sunflower print blouse, asked if they were still legally able to collect fines. Another muttered something about needing to call her brother, who does probate stuff. The vice president cleared his throat, louder this time. Do we have grounds for dissolution? That word hung heavy. Dissolution. It wasn't the kind of word people used in HOA meetings. Not next to mulch or fence height. It sounded final. Courtroom final. Someone gasped. Sophie glanced around, noting the residents who'd always voted silently, now frowning into their laps. Cheryl bristled. Let's not overreact. We'll fix this quietly. Martha didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. It's already not quiet. The grill sizzled, kids laughed, flags waved, and Cheryl was spiraling beneath her smile. The 4th of July barbecue in Sunridge Hollow had once been something neighbors looked forward to, back when potluck tables overflowed, and kids ran freely with sticky fingers and unmatched socks. This year, the park still had bunting on the gazebo, folding chairs in neat rows, and store-brand soda cooling in mismatched coolers. But something had shifted. It lived in the way people avoided eye contact, in the polite half-smiles and overlong sips of iced tea. Eleanor wore a white blouse and a blue scarf pinning a worn gold navy emblem over her heart. She hadn't planned on staying long. Martha stood beside her, arms crossed loosely, taking in the scene like a field general before the weather turned. Sophie wandered near the tables, balancing a paper plate and listening more than speaking. She passed by Emily and Daniel, the young couple from Lot 19, who nodded at her with hesitant warmth. Glad you came, Daniel said quietly. Heard things have been tense. Sophie simply smiled and offered, depends who you ask. Near the grill, Cheryl stood poised with microphone in hand and a patriotic sash she hadn't worn last year. Her HOA polo was swapped for a sleeveless blouse, but the undercurrent of control still hummed around her like feedback. When she tapped the mic, feedback did squeal, briefly, and someone flinched. Happy Independence Day, Sunridge, she began. This community has weathered many changes. And we're stronger for it, together. The applause was delayed. Some clapped politely. Some didn't bother. As your HOA president, I want to remind you this event is funded and protected by our shared contributions. Community standards, after all, are what preserve our way of life. Martha murmured, preserve the preservers, Sophie, now seated near the garden fence, pulled out her phone but didn't hit record. She only watched. Eleanor accepted a plate of deviled eggs from a neighbor who didn't meet her eyes. Across the field, Mr. Jonas sat alone on the bench under the elm, wearing his old veteran's cap and observing everything. His hands were still. His eyes were not. Cheryl continued her speech with practiced ease, reminders about lawn guidelines, praise for volunteers, a vague nod to ongoing transitions. Her voice never wavered. But her knuckles, wrapped tightly around the microphone, had started to pale. Sophie moved closer to the food line, listening. Two neighbors whispered nearby, their words just audible over the hum of conversation. She hasn't addressed the insurance thing. Didn't even mention the meeting. She's trying to bury it with bunting. A misfired firework cracked from the east side of the park, an early launch Roman candle meant for dusk. It zipped sideways, popping near the lemonade table. No one was hurt, but several kids screamed, and a woman dropped her plate. Cheryl snapped. This is why we have rules. Whose guests brought fireworks? Her eyes landed squarely on Eleanor. It came from that end of the field. I believe Eleanor's group set up there, she said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. Before Eleanor could respond, Martha stepped forward. That's enough, she said calmly. We're all aware of who brought what. And the HOA has already received 6 formal complaints this week, none of them from Eleanor, but several about misallocated funds and unclear leadership. People turned. Cheryl blinked. I'm addressing a safety issue. You're deflecting, Martha said, still gentle. And everyone here knows it. It was then that Mr. Jonas stood. He hadn't spoken at a public gathering in 3 years, not since the incident with the landscaper and the fence post. But now he walked slowly toward the front, cane tapping against the concrete with rhythmic finality. He didn't speak into a mic. He didn't raise his voice. But everyone heard it when he said, "Enough's enough, Cheryl." A white sedan with state plates pulled up to Cheryl's driveway. For once, no one answered the door. It idled there for a moment, engine murmuring like an afterthought. The morning heat shimmered over the blacktop, already over 90 degrees by 9 o'clock. The air was dry, blistering, the kind that curled edges of mail left too long in the box. Across the street, curtains shifted. Someone peeked, then disappeared. Mr. Jonas was already on his porch, mug in hand, cap tilted forward. He watched the sedan without moving, the way old men do when they've already guessed what's coming. Inside Eleanor's kitchen, Martha stood at the sink, drying her hands with a flour-dusted towel. That would be the Department of State Affairs, Regulatory Division, she said evenly. Sophie glanced out the window, phone in hand but not raised. Looks official. They are. Cheryl appeared 2 minutes later, stepping out in flats and a linen blouse that hadn't been ironed, a rare tell. She approached the investigator with practiced composure, hand outstretched. The man did not take it. I'm here to speak with the HOA board regarding recent complaints, he said, loud enough that neighbors could hear through half-open windows. And to review the association's operational compliance. Cheryl led him inside. The door shut softly behind them. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. By the time Martha and Eleanor arrived at the community room, Several board members were already present, visibly tense. The vice president dabbed his forehead with a napkin. Someone had brought a tray of grocery store cookies that remained untouched. The investigator stood near the projector, leafing through printed documents. These were submitted anonymously, he said. But the citations are well organized. And they cross-reference changes made to HOA rules not properly ratified. Cheryl cleared her throat. I believe some of those documents may be outdated. Martha stepped forward. Or they might be accurate and just inconvenient. The investigator held up a printed email. Is this the current proof of liability insurance? Cheryl took a beat too long to answer. It's in process. We're finalizing with a new provider. Date on this draft is March 2nd, the investigator replied. No signature. No policy number. That doesn't count. Sophie remained in the back, recording in silence. She zoomed in slowly as Cheryl shifted weight from one foot to the other. Eleanor sat near the wall, saying nothing. The investigator turned to the room. Until you produce active insurance, the HOA may not collect dues, enforce citations, or host formal meetings. Effective immediately. Someone let out an audible breath. The vice president raised a hand. What happens if we don't comply? The man looked at him without blinking. You'll be personally liable. The temperature in the room seemed to rise another 10 degrees. Cheryl said nothing. She stared at the printout in his hand like it had betrayed her. As the group filed out into the sunlight, conversations began in low hums. Neighbors lingered on sidewalks. A few looked toward Eleanor, unsure whether to nod or not. Some did. One brought over a pie, apple and cinnamon, wrapped in plastic. Just because, she said. Eleanor took it with both hands, blinking back surprise. Later, Cheryl walked over alone, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. You think you've won, she muttered. Eleanor replied softly, no. I think I've endured. There's no mistake, Martha said, laying down the invoice. You used HOA funds to redo your patio. The paper sat between them like a verdict. The community hall was fuller than it had ever been, folding chairs pressed shoulder to shoulder, box fans humming faintly in every corner, though they did nothing to move the thick July air. It smelled faintly of coffee, dust, and something like guilt. Cheryl blinked once, then looked down at the invoice, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her smile, once her greatest weapon, had vanished. Eleanor sat near the middle, posture straight but still. Sophie beside her held a small recorder, but didn't raise it. Martha remained standing, fingers lightly resting on a stack of documents. Her tone hadn't shifted once. These charges were hidden under community enhancements, Martha continued, tapping the breakdown. But this invoice was from your personal contractor. Same date, same materials, right down to the imported travertine tile you mentioned at the barbecue. A murmur rippled through the room. One neighbor leaned to another, whispering. The HOA vice president shifted uncomfortably in his seat and adjusted his glasses with damp fingers. Cheryl opened her mouth, closed it. Finally, she tried, this is a misunderstanding. I approved the purchase for sidewalk repairs near the clubhouse. Martha didn't flinch. There's no sidewalk near the clubhouse paved in travertine. Someone in the back snorted. Sophie scanned the room subtly. Emily and Daniel sat together, nodding slowly. Mr. Jonas was perched on a plastic chair by the far wall, both hands folded on his cane. His eyes didn't leave Cheryl. The vice president cleared his throat. Do you have any receipts or documentation to support the community use of these funds, Cheryl? She didn't answer. Martha handed over one more paper. This shows the HOA checking account, $7,632 withdrawn for improvements, with no matching vendor receipts filed. That alone is a violation of Sunridge HOA's own transparency code, Article 7. I didn't intend, Cheryl began. This isn't about intention anymore, Eleanor said softly, her voice steady. It's about trust. And what's broken when it's gone? A silence settled so full it seemed to dull the buzzing fans. Then Mr. Jonas stood. His movements were slow, but deliberate. "I wasn't going to speak," he said, voice raspy but clear. "But since we're laying things bare, I've got something." The room waited. "You all remember the sycamore tree, 4 years back? HOA said it had to go, diseased, unsafe. I begged them to let it be. Cheryl told me it was city mandated. I checked later. There was no city order. Just preference. Said the roots made the sidewalk bumpy." He paused. "It was my wife's tree." Gasps were not dramatic things. They just filled the space where people had once sat comfortably. And now, they shifted in their chairs. Emily leaned toward Daniel, whispering something that made him nod with quiet affirmation. The vice president stood up slowly. "Given the documentation, and the testimony presented, I move that we vote to suspend Cheryl Whitmore's presidency of this board effective immediately." A single, seconded, followed, then a sea of hesitant but rising hands. No one said no. Cheryl stood. Not abruptly. Not defiantly. She gathered her papers with shaky fingers, paused only once, and walked slowly toward the back. No one clapped. No one jeered. They just let her go. At the door, she paused, and turned. Her gaze met Eleanor's, no words, no smugness, no apology. Just silence. A final, still frame of someone who finally understood what had slipped through their fingers. A fresh coat of paint, sage green, not HOA approved, shimmered proudly under the morning sun. It dried evenly across the trim of Eleanor's porch, catching the golden light just enough to look intentional. The exact same shade she'd been told to remove. Except now, no one had the power to demand otherwise. The HOA board was dissolved, the fear dissolved with it. All that remained was color, and choice. Eleanor sat with a steaming mug of decaf resting between her palms. The ceramic was slightly chipped, same as always. Her porch chair creaked with familiarity as she shifted. Over the edge of the railing, she watched the desert horizon stretch wide and endless. Somewhere down the block, someone watered their succulents. Somewhere closer, a mockingbird mimicked a ringtone. Martha came out carrying a folded newspaper and a plate of toast. "You know, you could have gone with twilight taupe. Very modern." Eleanor smiled. "I had a leftover can. Funny how justice gets efficient after the paperwork clears." From the sidewalk, Sophie waved up, earbuds still in, her camera bag slung over one shoulder. Heading into town, she called. "Final edits today." Martha raised an eyebrow. "For your big exposé?" "Vlog," Sophie corrected. "Quiet Power. Aunt Eleanor's greatest hits." Eleanor chuckled. "That makes me sound dangerous." "Only in the slowest, most devastating way," Sophie said, grinning. "I'll bring back lemon scones." She disappeared down the path, steps light, humming something vaguely from the 70s. Mr. Jonas appeared half an hour later, holding a foil-wrapped pie like it might break if mishandled. "Lemon," he said, offering it up. "Grew the fruit myself. Martha said you're fond of tart." "She's right." He lingered, looking at the marigolds planted neatly in 2 old ceramic pots flanking the steps. "You got room to teach?" he asked. "Never had much luck growing anything but weeds." Eleanor moved a cushion to the second chair. "Sit a while. We'll start with soil." He did. Emily and Daniel passed by on their morning walk, hand in hand. They waved and called out, "Looks beautiful." Eleanor raised her mug in return. Daniel added, "First time in months it feels like our street again." That afternoon, someone from the interim committee stopped by with a clipboard and a hopeful tone. "We'd love to have your voice on the new board," she said. "Just until we're settled." Eleanor smiled. "I think I've done my part. But people trust you. They should learn to trust themselves." The woman nodded, not disappointed, just thoughtful. "If you change your mind." Eleanor just tipped her head gently. Later that evening, the porch glowed in the amber light of a setting sun. The sage trim looked more alive than ever. It wasn't rebellion, it was restoration. Inside, Sophie clicked her mouse. The final draft of her video hovered open, the title bar blinking, Quiet Power, How My Aunt Ended a System with a Signature. She reached for the mouse. Then paused. From the porch, Eleanor's voice drifted in through the screen door. Let it sit a while, sometimes peace is better kept quiet. In the soft light of a desert morning, a quiet porch and a sage green trim stood not just as a personal choice, but as a quiet victory. What began with a citation ended in a community reclaiming its voice, proving that even against petty authority, calm resolve and careful truth can turn the tide. When rules serve fairness, neighborhoods flourish. When they're twisted for power, they unravel from within. Perhaps the greatest change comes not with noise, but with one signature, one steady hand, and a town that finally breathes easy. Like a flag unfurled in a still wind, peace sometimes needs no anthem, only space to fly.